was kneeling on my kitchen floor, sorting jars of blueberry jam for the reunion potluck, when my phone lit up with a message from my Aunt Lila. Please don't embarrass yourself this year. Come tidy. A beat later, a second text landed, an accidental forward from the cousins group chat. It was a photograph of me at 12, braces glinting, cheeks shiny with tears after my mother's wake. Lila had captioned it with a row of laughing emojis and, "Some people never grow out of it." The air seemed to thin. Outside, the late afternoon light slipped across the sink in silvery slats, bright then dim, as if the sun were blinking. The jam lids clicked as they cooled, breathing little metallic sighs. I looked at my reflection in the oven door, sleeves rolled, hair in a knot, a woman who kept her promises, and felt the old ache of being the family afterthought, the sensitive one, the quiet one, the girl whose mother died and left behind only a modest house, a lakeside cabin, and a reputation for choosing love over strategy. I deleted nothing. I let the words sit and burn. Then I reached for the shoebox at the back of the pantry, Mom's letters, tied with sky blue ribbon that had faded to a tender gray. I hadn't read them all. I'd always convinced myself I didn't need to. On top was an envelope I didn't recognize, thick and cream-colored, my name written in the careful slope of her hand, Rowan. The house was very quiet. Somewhere far off a train horn mourned and fell away. I opened the envelope by sliding a butter knife beneath the seal. Before my eyes could find the first line, my phone buzzed again. "You'll sit at the end with the kids," Lila wrote. Near the door. I exhaled and placed the letter back for the morning. I would go. I would bring the jam. I would sit by the door, if I chose. And I would read my mother's words when I could hear them. The reunion lived in a place between tradition and theater. Every June, the Elridge family gathered beneath cottonwood trees along Archer's Lake, where the water was the color of tea and minnows made quick silver stitches near the shore. The older cousins wore linen and laughed with their whole throats, the younger ones arranged selfie bouquets of faces and sun hats. My aunt, in her usual coral blazer, held court beside the dessert table like a hostess on a television show, bright, precise, always casting. What I risked losing by showing up, I realized as I stepped from my car with the jam cradled in my arms, wasn't just my pride. It was the thin thread I'd kept tied to the place my mother loved. It was the story of us, the long Saturdays sanding the cabin's railings, the winter nights when the stove shook and we told each other the truth. If Lila was laughing now, it was because, for years, she taught everyone to accept a smaller version of me. To her, I was the garnish, not the meal. "You found us," she sang, gliding toward me. She assessed my dress the way a jeweler examines a flawed stone. "Next time, ask me about a seamstress." I set the jam among the pies and cakes. My hands trembled. Across the lawn, the lake fanned out, a calm and watchful eye. My cousin Barrett raised a glass and winked. Lila leaned in with a smile that never touched her eyes. "You'll be at the children's table," she said lightly. "Closer to the kitchen door. In case I spill." I asked softly. "In case you need fresh air," she replied. "You've always been prone." Prone. As if grief were a hobby. As if silence were weakness. My mother's letter was in my bag, heavy as a tide. I imagined reading it later by the water, letting her voice settle me. But at the far end of the lawn, beneath the framed family tree that Lila hung like a museum piece, I noticed something new, a glossy photograph of the lakeside cabin with a plaque beneath it, donated to the Archers Lake Association by the Elridge Family Council. My breath cut short. Donated. The cabin. Ours. Since when? I asked. Lila followed my gaze. Since this spring, she said, as if discussing a weather change. It was neglected. We found a better use. Neglected. I stared at the photograph, at the neat plaque letters. If this was theater, then this was the scene where the layperson realizes the contract was signed without her. I felt the ground pitch. My mother's letter, unopened, seemed to pulse against my side like a small, steady heart. I excused myself with a smile and walked down the dock until the lawn's murmurs thinned to a hush. The boards were warm under my sandals, sunlight bounced and broke in soft shards along the water's surface. A dragonfly stitched invisible seams in the air. I sat on the edge, legs dangling over the lake's tea-brown gloss, and opened the envelope. Rowan, my love, if you're reading this, it's because I wasn't brave enough to say it aloud without crying. I asked Mr. Feld, the attorney, to hold this until you were ready. The cabin is in a transfer on death deed to you. I did it quietly. I knew the family would talk. I know Lila. She loves the idea of fairness when it favors her. The cabin is not an asset to be managed by a committee. It's our breath in winter, our orchard in summer. Keep it or sell it if you must, but let it be your choice, not theirs. If they tell you it was neglected, tell them neglect is a word people use when they want your portion. I believe in you. Don't argue, present. And if you need courage, stand where the stove used to rattle and listen. Love, Mom. The dock seemed to draw closer to the lake as I read. Transfer on death deed. I read the line twice, 3 times. I flipped to the second page and there it was, Mr. Feld's letterhead, a copy of the recorded deed, and a note, per your mother's instructions, deliver upon Rowan's request or upon any encroachment to her rights. Encroachment. The plaque. The donation. A current ran along my arms, tiny and cold. I set the pages on my lap and breathed until my breath matched the small wavelets sliding against the pylons. My mother had anticipated Lila. She had left not just a memory but a lover. When I returned to the lawn, the toast was beginning. Lila stood beneath the family tree display with the cabin photograph at her back, smiling at the gathered cluster. We do what is best for the whole, she declared, crystal glass raised, which sometimes means tough decisions about property. I'm so proud of us. I waited for quiet. Then I stepped forward and, in a voice that was calm because it had to be, said, speaking of property, I have a letter from my mother. Heads turned. The lake held a long breath. It concerns the cabin. Lila's smile thinned. Oh, sweetheart, she said, the way one says it to a child who brings a wildflower to a scholarship ceremony. Let's not. Today is about togetherness. Then we'll do it together, I said. I reached into my bag and felt the cool, reassuring edge of the deed. Mr. Feld's office was a 6-minute drive away. But my mother's voice was here, neat and sure on the page. Present, she had written, not argue. Mr. Feld arrived before the coffee cooled. He was older than I remembered, face shaped by 100 probate winters, the kind of man whose presence quiets a room without asking. He held a slim folder and wore a tie the color of river stones. Lila greeted him with brittle brightness that rang like a fork against a glass. Really, she said, low but audible, must we involve paperwork at a picnic? We involve truth wherever it goes, he replied pleasantly. He turned to me. Miss Elridge. The unfamiliar formality steadied me. We stood beneath the family tree, the cabin's photograph watching like a witness who could not be compelled to speak. Mr. Feld opened the folder and removed one document. This is a copy of the transfer on death deed recorded by your late sister, he said to Lila, naming her daughter, Rowan Elridge, as the sole beneficiary of the cabin at Archer's Lake. A hush fell as complete as snowfall. Someone's ice melted and chimed in a glass. Lila's lips parted, closed, parted again. That can't be, she said, finally. We discussed. You were not a party to the deed, Mr. Feld said gently. I have with me the recording information. He passed me the paper. The numbers were exacting and unromantic, and I loved them like a lighthouse. Any action taken to donate, transfer, encumber, or otherwise dispose of the property without Ms. Elridge's consent would be void. Barrett cleared his throat. So the plaque is, at best, premature, Mr. Feld said. Lila's eyes settled on me as if I had become a stain that wouldn't lift. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice gone thin. Because you didn't ask when it wasn't yours, I thought. Because some loves are not for committee votes. Aloud, I said, my mother asked me to present, not argue. I handed the deed to my aunt and watched her read, watched the moment her posture changed, a subtle fall of the shoulders as if releasing the weight of her performance. She glanced up, a waver in her expression, and the mockery that had so often lived at the corners of her mouth was, for the first time, absent. I wanted it to be useful, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. It will be, I answered. To me. The reunion absorbed the revelation as reunions do, with quick topic changes, a few sidelong looks, the damp hush of gossip realigning its edges. The plaque was quietly removed. I helped lift it, cool metal, the weight of presumption. Lila watched, jaw held tight. No one cheered. That was fine. Justice does not always need an audience, it needs a record. Mr. Feld touched my elbow. There is also a small trust, he said softly, for maintenance. Your mother anticipated their arguments. He smiled with a kind of admiration meant not for me but for the woman who had loved me. She was, as ever, thorough. I nodded, and for a moment my eyes burned. The wind moved through the cottonwoods with the sound of soft pages turning. When I looked back at Lila, her coral blazer glowed in the muted light like a warning buoy at dusk, bright, conspicuous, necessary to see and not to strike. I drove to the cabin at twilight, the deed tucked safely into the glove box, the trust document folded in my wallet so I could feel its square certainty against my palm. The lane was narrower than memory, alder leaves whispering at the windows. When the trees broke, the lake opened like a kept promise. The cabin, our small, stubborn rectangle of pine, stood with its back straight and its porch sagging the way an honest body sags with time. Inside, the stove corner was still warm in the mind. I set my bag on the table and stood where the stove used to rattle, right where Mom had told me to stand if I needed courage. The boards creaked, a night moth circled the window in quiet punctuation. I read her letter again, just her last paragraph, until the words stopped vibrating with adrenaline and settled into place like good nails. There would be repairs. There would be new screens, a roof patch, a railing sanded back to softness. There would be summer mornings with the windows flung open and winter afternoons when the lake's breath iced the edges of the glass. There would be sunsets with their orange-rind light slipping over the water, and breakfasts at the little table with my knees pulled close, listening to loons call out like lonely violins. There might even be, one day, children's shoes kicked beneath the bench, or another pair of boots by the door that were not mine. But the first season would be quiet. The first season would be for listening. Before I left, I wrote a letter on the back of an old menu I found in the drawer, the paper soft with many summers. Aunt Lila, it began, the cabin is not a prize. It is a place where a person can be whole. I wish you places like that too. I didn't send it. I tucked it into the shoebox with Mom's ribbon notes. I have learned that some words are not for winning, they are for release. When I locked the door, the night had cooled the porch boards to a gentle ache. Far across the water, a porch light blinked on, then off. I stood under a sky black enough to make the stars feel like breath holes punched in a perfect lid, and I understood that what had changed wasn't only the legal status of a small building at Archer's Lake. It was the scale of my voice. I no longer had to measure it against anyone's laughter. I could say what was mine, calm as weather, clear as deed language, final as ink. On the drive back, I thought of the reunion's future editions, the cottonwoods, the pies, the long tables under soft strings of light, and the gentle ebb of cousins' babies becoming toddlers becoming teens. I would still bring jam. I would still say hello to Barrett and help the aunties fold chairs. If Lila laughed, it would be at something else, or not at all. And when someone asked where I was staying, I would say, at the cabin, and an entire section of my life would answer with me, the stove, the dock, my mother's handwriting, my own hand steady on the rail. At home, I slid the deed into the fireproof box where passports sleep, and I placed Mom's letter on top, deliberate as setting bread to rise. I washed the jam jars and turned them upside down on a towel, listening to the tiny taps as they settled. The night pressed its cool face to the windows. In the hush, I felt a thread run from the girl in the photograph to the woman wiping her hands on a dishcloth, and I understood, the thread had always been mine to hold, not theirs to sever. No one clapped. No one needed to. The sound I wanted was quieter, the click of a lock turned with certainty, the slow breath of a house that knows its person, and the soft, steady voice of a mother who had seen past the noise and made room for me to arrive.